Late diagnosis is a term that refers to anyone who's being diagnosed post that early childhood period.
I would consider, mid to late teens a late diagnosis for even somebody who we would class as a very high functioning person with autism/Asperger's syndrome.
I went through my schooling without a diagnosis. I did go to see psychologists for treatment of anxiety and relationship issues and the like, but not to have a formal diagnosis of anything like autism spectrum disorder. I actually wasn't formally diagnosed until I was 30 years old, and that was through attending university, and a associate professor suggested that I get a diagnosis, and she arranged for me to see various people to do that.
A late diagnosis can happen for various reasons. Ideally, we would pick up this issue of autism, Asperger's from a young age, but often circumstances mean that you're not going to see a child at, say, 4, 5, 6 years of age, and that could be because of the child's temperament and perhaps even IQ level. Usually, the later the diagnosis means the child is a higher functioning, more subtle presentation, or they've grown up in a family and a community, say a school community, that just kind of gets them and accepts them, so we don't have a lot of the anxiety problems, mood problems, outburst problems. Or, unfortunately, there will be, many parents that we see that have seen other professionals that have used other diagnoses to account for some of the issues. And common ones are oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, reactive attachment disorder, even learning issues like dyslexia. He's not fitting in because he's got some learning issues and that's why he doesn't want to go to school, etc. And then all of a sudden somebody years down the track says, oh, maybe actually this collection of issues might have more to do with Asperger's rather than, say, oppositional defiant disorder. And the treatment, depending on diagnosis, is actually very, very important. The way you handle a child with an oppositional defiant disorder will be leagues apart to somebody with behavioural issues that has Asperger's syndrome. So these diagnostic issues are very, very important to sort out early, but sometimes they're not, and they'll come much later.
A typical story for late diagnosis will be where a young woman, probably around about between 12 and 15 years of age, is suddenly, she's transited from a junior school into high school, and she's suddenly acting out, or she's behaving in uncontrolled ways, or she's in fact developing eating disorders. And more frequently we're finding high functioning boys who functioned well in primary school no longer functioning, of course, once they make that transition. They also get picked up. So that's the starting point.
The signs that typically are presenting in an older child, say we're talking high school years, will be some manifestation of anxiety. So if you're an anxious person and your hormone levels are rising, that will tend to play out in sort of a lot of mood disturbance. So you might get feelings of being just completely overwhelmed by being in a large school setting. It'll affect your sleep. It'll affect your really desire to keep wanting to attend an environment that is causing further anxiety. And so the key things that we tend to see is just a feeling of being overwhelmed, meaning that they're anxious. And if you keep trying to be like everybody else but you're not and allowances aren't made for you, it might really affect your self-esteem and your confidence about keep on attending school. So we get then social withdrawal.
So parents will notice control problems and teachers will notice social and behavioural problems. what will happen then is the teacher will recommend that the parents seek a diagnosis, or they'll find a school psychologist who will recommend the parents seek diagnosis. If the child's got an appropriate diagnosis, we're then able to institute interventions that may lead to some kind of reasonable forward structure to assist their prognosis.
In terms of what we would think are the most important things of a later diagnosed child. So somebody's diagnosed in early teen years, for example. First of all, we need to educate the child to know that they're not bad. The issue with these people is they are often a very good heart, actually usually quite rule orientated, but when things go wrong or if they're not understood properly, we can have big meltdowns. Now, if you grow up in your childhood years thinking you are a good person, a solid citizen, and yet you keep on mucking up, you start to lose a lot of self-confidence. And a lot of these kids have already diagnosed themselves as psycho by 10 years of age. So to change that language and to say, well, actually, there's nothing wrong with you, but you are different. And that's why your brain easily, slides into meltdown mode when things go wrong. It's terribly important that child grows up knowing that they're not bad. People with Asperger's are very black and white in their thinking. I'm either a superstar or it's all over for me, I'm terrible. There's not a lot of grey. And life is actually more about the grey. We try, and we achieve. People with Asperger's tend to be still drawn towards that rather black and white way of seeing the world. So that child needs to know they're not bad, but they need to be handled perhaps a bit differently. So it's very, very, very important. And that can be a very tough time to actually talk to them about being different, you see, because of course most of them are full of hormones as well, and teenage hormones are all about, I'm going to be like everybody else. So I don't like somebody telling me that perhaps, my brain works in a different way. So that can be an awfully challenging thing to try to get across to them.